Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. Round 11 in the Tata Steel Masters got off to an unfortunate start as Daniel Dubov tested positive for COVID and has had to withdraw from the event. Now that means that his scores in the tournament stand, but he's had to default the final 3 games. So obviously that has quite an effect on the tournament, as for example he had yet to play Magnus Carlsen, who now receives a full point. Anyway, let's move on from that. And I want to talk about the game between Jorden van Foreest and Anish Giri. This was without doubt the game of the day in Vaikanzee. So going to this game, Van Foreest was a bit under 50%, and Anish Giri, of course, vying for first place. It's interesting, if you look at the score table, Van Foreest has 1s and 0s plastered next to his name. You know, he's a really ambitious player, a really enterprising player, plays, you know, unusual openings sometimes, or quirky little systems that he's worked out. Of course, he was last year's winner. So, you know, we were in for an intriguing battle, as of course these two Dutch players know each other very well indeed. And Giri, you know, playing for a win, goes for the Nimzo. So, you know, we've seen already in this tournament this can lead to really unbalanced positions, and of course that suits him. He's playing for a win. And Van Foreest went for one of the most uncompromising lines, the Zamish variation, which looks crazy. And whenever I faced this with black, I was absolutely delighted, because it basically provokes black into exactly what he wants. That is damaging white's pawns. It means the pawn on c4 now is really weak because it can't be protected by another pawn. And black starts the process of first restraining the c-pawn and then sets up an attack on that pawn on c4. Like I said, whenever my opponents played this, I was absolutely delighted, and invariably I just kind of crushed them positionally. But in the hands of someone that knows what they're doing, then this system is very dangerous. The basic problem is that this bishop has no opponent, so one has to be very careful with black. It's interesting to see that over the last couple of years in rapid play tournaments, Carlsen has actually played this with white. Carlsen, incredible. You know, normally someone who's very positionally responsible, but even Magnus has played this. So f3, really ambitious, playing for a big centre. And black starts the process of ganging up on that c-pawn. I should say with knight a5, Carlsen faced bishop a6. So Carlsen against Ding went like this, and this was in the Lindores Abbey tournament in Scotland. I was commentating live on this game at Lindores Abbey, and that was a very interesting game actually. But you can see the basic problem, that black has to deal with this pin, and while black is attacking over here, then, you know, this can be problematic. Anyway, knight a5 played. And now bishop a6. There was a game between Carlsen and Aronian that went d6 here first, but bishop a6 played by Giri. And this is the engine move. There you go. Anish pays close attention in his preparation to engine analysis, so that doesn't surprise me. Attacking the pawn, queen e2, and here d6. But it was notable that Giri was slowing up. You know, it would have been hard for him to anticipate this system, and it is very, very tricky. And here we go, f4. I mean, some players like to play knight h3 here, but f4 makes room for the knight to come to f3 is very logical. But of course it takes a little bit more time. Queen d7 played by Giri after 15 minutes thought. Well, you know, that's a clear indication that he was now sort of feeling his way through in the position. Another way to play is to preempt white's push and play knight d7, and then to play e5. But queen d7 is absolutely typical for these lines. The queen wants to come in here. Knight f3, queen a4. It was notable that while Giri was thinking some time, Van Foreest was playing relatively quickly here. And the knight came back to defend that pawn. So it's a bit of a traffic jam here. You know, the knight blocks that bishop on c1, but at least that pawn is being held. 3 pieces defending, 3 pieces attacking, so it's a standoff at the moment. And here, again, a 16-minute thought from Giri. He played e5, preventing white pushing with e5. One could play castle's queenside here, which, you know, takes the king off to the other side of the board. The idea would be away from white's pieces, but this is still very tricky actually. After this and rook b1, and you can see that queen is sort of running a little bit short of squares. But it's possible to play like this. But e5 is sort of principled. You know, you stop this pawn advancing, and of course if white takes everything here, then this somehow doesn't look so great. The knight comes back. You can see these squares are available for the knight. So castle's kingside, of course. There's no need to resolve the tension in the middle. And here I was amazed at Giri's next move. Maybe shocked is a better word. He castled on the kingside. Now that is putting the king exactly sort of in the line of white pieces, and even allowing a sacrifice straight away. I mean, castle's queenside was still possible. Knight d7 was possible, just to take the knight out of the rook's beam. Although, you know, even here, you know, moves like rook f3 and to g3 are possible. But somehow castles, yeah, I mean, that really, really surprised me. Van Foreest took after some thought, and now it was possible to play this exchange sacrifice. I think, you know, white certainly has compensation there. But Van Foreest thought for 23 minutes. He was obviously considering the sacrifice and played rook b1. And this gives black the chance to remove the knight, although I can sort of understand why Giri didn't want to do this. I mean, this isn't altogether satisfactory. So, for example, rook b4, I mean, it looks kind of odd to have the rook here, but the queen also isn't wonderfully placed. It's a curious position, this. And now knight f3, and let's say f6 to bolster, but knight h4, I mean, you know, this knight is pretty good here, and somehow the rook looks odd, but then again it's protecting this important pawn. I mean, there are 3 defenders still, 3 attackers, so basically the pawn is secure. But it means if white holds this pawn for the time being, then these pieces are out of play. Yes, the rook is somewhat out of play, but it means that white holds the position and can concentrate on the king side. Very unclear still, but certainly white has the initiative. I mean, that's why Giri played c5 to stop rook b4, and it's logical to blockade this pawn. Nevertheless, this is, I mean, an invitation to dinner. But it looks like only white is dining here. now rook takes knight is even better. And queen f3. I mean, look at this position. You know, white has smashed the pawns in front of the king. There are no defenders. And look at black's pieces here. Basically, all these pieces are in Siberia. It's pretty cold out there, but it's getting hot around the king. That's the problem. So black desperately needs to bring some pieces back. I mean, just an example, if, okay, this is very careless, then e5 and, well, it's mate follows shortly, basically, once this opens up. And if bishop takes here, then takes. I mean, this is so simple, you know, white's pieces just flood in. So the queen desperately needs to return to play, defending the pawn here. Now d5, queen d6. And this means that this knight, with the pawn on d5, obviously the knight can't come back very easily. These pieces still don't look very good. And now, absolutely key move in white's attack. Knight f1. Making way for the bishop, potentially. But really, it's this knight that is able to join the attack via one of these squares. I mean, this is fantastically strong. I mean, just positionally, it looks beautiful. And if, well, let's say bishop takes c4, basically, tactically, it loses knight e3 and knight f5, hitting the queen, followed by queen g3 and queen g7 later. I mean, this is clockwork. So the king steps aside, king h8, making room for the rook, but knight e3, this has worked perfectly because the knight and bishop defend the c-pawn, so these pawns are still stuck out in the cold. And knight f5 coming, so bishop c8 must be played to cover f5. Now you don't need to move the knight in straight away. Now it's time to bring the other pieces into the game. Bishop d2. Rook here. And now bishop e1. Great move. So the bishop is going to bounce out to h4. There he goes. Bishop h4. And the rook is heading over. I mean, it's a lovely position. Rook h6 hits the bishop. Queen f2. Defending the bishop. Bishop d7. And now rook f1. Hitting the pawn here. I mean, this is such a difficult position. You know, the knight can come back, but then bishop takes pawn. I mean, it's just superb compensation. So king g7 defends. So what's the next stage? So black has 3 defenders matching the 3 attackers. So f6, the f6 pawn has been held for the time being. How should white make progress? You could throw the knight in, but that gets exchanged off. It's not conclusive. So what next? Well, all these pieces are very good. So we have to look at the white's piece which isn't performing the best, which is the bishop on d3. So bishop e2. Very nice. So the idea is to bring the bishop to g4, exchange this one off, and then these 2 squares will be available for white's pieces. The knight may come into f5, it might come to g4 to attack the pawn on f6. Let's see. So yeah, knight b7, bishop g4, and this is just winning after the exchange. And the knight hits these 2. So bishop e2, rook g6 played to cover here, but very simple. h3, just protecting g4, so bishop g4 is coming anyway. So for example, I mean, this didn't happen, but if rook g8, then bishop g4 takes. Now 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces attacking the pawn f6. Once that falls, well, black is not going to last very long in this position. White can just take it very gently, making sure everything is protected, everything is covered before, you know, plunging in for the kill. But yeah, this is coming. If that's defended, then e5 is going to drop. Just got to watch out for rook g2, but you know, that's easy to deal with. After h3, Giri took on h3, but now bishop h5. So that means if the rook moves aside, then check. King moves, queen takes bishop. So rook takes bishop, and now knight f5. This rook is doomed anyway, so rook takes, queen takes. Well, white is winning. Bishop takes. Check out the knight, still stranded. So after bishop h5, Giri just retreated the bishop and gave back the exchange, and now bishop takes f6. So white has broken through. So let's look at the material. It is even material now, but the crucial thing is, look at those dark squares around the king. No dark square bishop. This is the problem with the Nimzo. If it goes wrong, then it looks pretty ugly because there's no dark squared bishop. And that e5 pawn, of course, is really vulnerable. Rook f8. Okay, rook f3. Van Foreest just takes his time at this moment. Just does things very gently. There's no need to rush it. This pawn is hanging. Queen takes, and now the idea is just remove the queen and then push the pawns. There's not a lot that black can do. Knight d6, e5. Giri put the knight back here. d6, so that makes room for the knight to come to d5. Knight takes f6, e takes f6. Now if bishop e6 to cover d5, well, it doesn't really matter in this position. Well, once the knight comes here, that's fatal, but bishop takes, pawn takes, completely winning. These pawns are secure. Black can do nothing. Queen here, and so on. Giri played queen e8, knight d5, queen e1 check. White just has to be careful that there's no perpetual. That you just got to make sure the queen isn't doing anything too dreadful. Knight e7 check, king h8, and now this is a really fine moment. This is the final move of the game. Just pause the video and have a think. How do you play here with white? There's nothing absolutely obvious in this position. I mean, one can hold the position, one can play moves like queen e5, and then you can move the rook, so h5 is covered. I mean, little by little, white can crawl in, but Van Foreest found a beautiful winning move here. They were past the time control at move 40, and he had time to think things through, and he found the move, wait for it, rook h3, and after thinking for some time, Giri resigned. Right, so why is this such a crushing move? The threat is to play knight takes g6, and you can see that the kings can't step anywhere at the moment. Okay, so what about bishop takes rook? Well, here there's a beautiful move, d7, opening up the diagonal, threatening queen b8 and inevitable checkmate. There really is no defense. If rook f8, covering the back rank, knight takes pawn, check, and mate. And if king g8, taking on f8, and then queen b8 check, and you get a queen. So those are the basic variations if bishop takes. Well, okay, what if black defends the pawn on g6 with, say, queen c2? Well, in fact, rook h6 is good enough. And now there really is no defence to knight g6. I mean, black will be able to give up the queen, but of course that's completely hopeless. Wow, what a beautiful final move, and what a beautiful game. It seemed to work so smoothly, but it just shows what happens in the Nimzo when it goes wrong for black. I've experienced this myself. Black's position can fall apart so badly, but then again, I think Anish had a pretty bad day. There are certain moves there that, castling into it with castle kingside. I think it's already a difficult position, but castling kingside really was a bit too casual. But it also shows that, this line, supposedly, if you look at this with an engine, then it thinks that black is absolutely fine. But the point is, from a human point of view, this is such a complex position that with every move, you're kind of on a knife edge. And it's so difficult to play. So an excellent opening choice from Jorden van Foreest. Okay, what are the scores on the doors? Let me see. Now, the round wasn't quite over when I left it. Actually, let's just see what's happened. Because Carlsen was still trying to defeat Vidit. If he could beat him, then that would be significant. No, that game finally ended in a draw. So that means, let's just go back. Okay, just bear with me. That game ended in a draw. So, standings. After 11 rounds, Magnus Carlsen has 7.5 out of 11. Richard Rapport has 7 out of 11. Anish Giri has 6.5. So does Mamedyarov. So that loss by Giri really significant because it means, remember, Carlsen will pick up a point by default against Dubov, and then he just has one more game, and that's against Fabiano Caruana, and that, I think, is his game tomorrow. But anyway, it's looking pretty good for Carlsen now after that. Yeah, Carlsen has black against Caruana tomorrow, so that's a big game, actually. Right, I think I've talked enough. Thanks for watching.